Something that we do a lot of is servicing harps, as you might imagine. I think it's something that obviously people generally have done on quite a regular basis, every sort of year, 2 years, something like that. But quite often I don't think people actually know what happens during a service. So I thought I'd do a little video just telling you kind of what the basic steps are for a service and generally what happens and what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. First thing we do when we're servicing a harp is have a look at the structure, just check over everything, make sure everything's all good, have a look at the soundboard, check if there's any splits or ruptures or anything, have a look at the neck, check for cracks or warping or anything like that, just to see what state the harp's in basically before we get going. Once we've had a look over it and established that there's nothing sort of majorly outstandingly wrong, the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the pedals. So we're basically checking the felts to see if the felts are super worn or need replacing basically. At the same time as we're doing that, we will check the pedal motion, which is basically checking how the discs operate, or sort of how the pedals are operating the discs. Because if the pedal motion needs adjusting, you'll see that when you put it into the natural, and then as you move down into sharp, the natural disc will keep moving. So we want to look out for that, because that will either be something that would be fixed by refelting the pedals, or we would need to adjust the length of the pedal rods. Essentially, we don't want that, because as it goes into the natural, the disc should stop dead. If it keeps rotating as you move into the sharp, it's putting more pinch onto the natural, and it's going to make it more prone for the sharp to be sharp, and you might not be able to adjust it out if you've got this kick on the mechanism. It doesn't need to be absolutely 100% dead perfect, so if it's got a little bit of a kick, just a tiny bit of movement, we call it a kick, when you're pushing it down into the sharp, then chances are it's fine and it's going to be making a minimal difference. Generally it's only up at the bases here sort of thing, and if you're seeing a kick down into this area, then you definitely need to get that adjusted out, because it's going to be throwing your intonation off all crazy sort of thing. But if it's only kicking on the first one or two, and it's only kicking a tiny bit, then you're fine. But if not, then we need to adjust the pedal rod. Basically you're adjusting the length of the pedal rod. Let's see, if I do a little video of this, I will drop it in now. So in order to adjust the pedal rod length, I'm going to unscrew this, which attaches the pedal to the pedal rod itself. Once I've got that out, we've got this saddle which holds onto the pedal, which is on a threaded part of the pedal rod, and by either screwing it in or out, we can adjust the length of the pedal rod effectively. This one's quite tight, but it is turning. It might actually be screwing in at the top, but that doesn't matter too much. I'll pop that back on there, put the screw back in, and once it's all back together, we'll check to see if it's got rid of the kick. Hopefully you just saw a video. So that is showing adjusting the saddle, because you're basically shortening or lengthening the rod to adjust this kick out. So once we've got that sorted, we'll move on to the regulation. Now that we've got the pedals all adjusted, we're going to move on to the regulation, which is a big part of the service. So essentially what we're doing is we are checking the intonation, the relative intonation, so that's between this I'm calling the flat position, because that's just straight off the bridge, so the pedal will be in the flat position. This is the natural position, and that's the sharp position, so we're trying to balance all three of them. Obviously we can tune relatively perfectly, as it were, into the flat position, but due to the limitations of the harp, it's not always perfect. You're not always able to get these completely perfect between the natural and the sharp. But yeah, we're going to go through every single string, we're going to do it in the three positions and check the relative intonation. Again, because of the limitations of a harp, you know, you're trying to squeeze what's essentially a sort of piano into a much smaller form. So there's always going to be limitations and just the geometry and trying to get the pedal motion to transfer into the discs and just getting everything right. So it's a little bit limited, but basically when we're doing adjusting this intonation, we've got kind of two options, as it were. We can either adjust the bridge, not on these ones, but down or up, as it were, here. The reason these aren't adjustable is basically there's so much tension on these strings that you couldn't have an adjustable bridge that would stay in place. So it's only for the higher strings that you have an adjustable bridge. So by moving the bridge up and down, we can either sharpen or flatten the string relative to the disc. It's all about the string length compared to the distance between the bridge and the discs and the disc basically. I can't remember what the ideal distance is now. I want to say it's like 1 in 17 or 1 in 20 or something. I probably should have looked that up first, but there you go. So by moving the bridge closer or further away from the disc, we can adjust that relative length and either sharpen or flatten the string relative to the disc. So that's the preferred method of adjusting the relative intonation, but beyond that we've also got adjusting the pinch of the disc. So as you can see, this one's, hopefully you can see that, let's pick a lower down string and it will be a bit easier to see. So you can see the pinch there, that's about the right amount of pinch, so ideally we'd like to keep that the same, but if it needs to be a bit sharper, we'll twist that disc on a little bit more so it pinches a little bit harder, or if it's too sharp then we can slacken it off, but obviously only to a certain extent. Once we've got that correct, then we'll move on to the sharp disc, and again we can adjust the pinch of that to get the relative intonation as close as possible, sort of thing. It's a little bit limited. They tend to be, just harps in general tend to either be a bit flat or sharp in the basses because it's so difficult to get that pinch correct, basically, with either not having too much pinch because it just won't hold that much pinch, or too little where the string starts buzzing. The middle section tends to be pretty good, although again you get some areas which are worse than others, and then when you get up to the top ranges it again starts to tend to be a bit sharp just because of the limitations of the harp. Luckily we tend to set them a little bit sharp anyway, just because it sounds better to have something sharp rather than flat when you're up at the top end there. So I think that's basically what happens during the regulation. I suppose I'd say that we try to aim to get within about 4 cents of a tone when we're doing the regulation, and you'd probably, because of the way that you have to balance things, it may be dead on in the flat, or will be dead on in the flat, then it might be sort of 4 flat in the natural and then 4 sharp in the sharp, just because you're trying to get that balance between the two, and I'd much rather have it so that it's 4 flat there and 4 sharp here, rather than that's dead on and then that's 8 sharp, just because it's going to sound worse. So it's trying to create that balance. Now that we've got the regulation done, we're going to move on to a buzz check. There's a couple of sort of main reasons for buzzing, which I'll go through, and then there's sort of myriad other things that can cause buzzes, some of which can be fixed, others which can't, or can at great expense and sometimes not really viable. But so the first thing is just lack of pinch. So if the disc isn't gripping enough, you're going to get a buzz like that because of lack of pinch, whereas when it's gripping properly, you'll get, you know, a pure tone sort of thing. So that's the first thing we'll check. We just run through everything and check that there's no lack of pinch, and we can adjust that. Sometimes it's a bit of a compromise because you might have to put a little bit more pinch on just to get it to stop buzzing, but that may mean that you end up with it being a little bit sharp, but obviously better to have a little bit of sharpness rather than a buzz. So that's the first thing we'll do, is just adjust those pinches of the discs. Then the other main thing to do is to adjust the tension of the disc itself. So salvie mechanisms aren't sprung. Salvie and line Healy, I think line Healy are the same now. But you can still, by adjusting the nuts on the back side of the plate, you can adjust the tension of the arbor through the plate. With a sprung mechanism, you're adding more spring onto the back to force it into the plate. Basically, when things are too loose, it will just rattle around inside out. It's not, this is nice and tight, so it's not doing that. But essentially, you're going to adjust that tension because a little bit of play will cause rattles and buzzes, basically. If it's not down to that, then you can have all sorts of loose sort of parts in the mechanism which cause rattling and buzzing. The pillar can have issues in the pillar which can cause rattling and buzzing again. All of those are things that sort of are addressed on a case-by-case basis, and you know, until you've gone through a harp you don't know. So yeah, you just have to sort of go through everything and see what you can find and see what you can fix, basically. So I think that's covered the major parts of a service. It's possible that I've left something out, but hopefully you found that sort of slightly informative and gives you a bit more of an idea of what goes on when your harp's being serviced. If you liked it, let me know, and subscribe and like and all of those things that I meant to say. Cheers.